So from last week's Parshas Shmini, we learned all about the kosher animals, not kosher animals, although we're talking about animals, birds, fish, and even the insects, right? And so the question that sort of is interesting to think about is, what about milk? How does milk fit into all of this? And so there's a Gemara in Bechoros that is really isn't focused on milk, but the subject of milk comes up in the middle. So we're going to take a look at just like four different pieces within this long Gemara that'll sort of shed some light on this subject. So the first piece is Amar le Ravacha bre de Rava the Ravashi. Sorry, we'll just give hey Uri. We just got started, so I'm just going to restart. But we're going to talk about how do we and what is the sense of kosher of milk? How do we know it's kosher? What about milk from a non-kosher animal? This all comes up from last week's parsha, from Parshas Shmini. So the Gemara in Bechoro says, Amar le Ravacha b'rei Rava l'Ravashi elamiyata taimid Rabbanim megamal gamal v'Rabbi Shimon me'es hagamal. So there's a Gemara that's talking about how we learn out, and it has nothing to do with milk. It's a different subject altogether of kashrus and animals, but there's a machlokas there of how we learn out specific things, and according to the Rabbanin, it's from the double language of Gamal, and Gamal is twice. Rav Shimon says no, it's Hagamal, the fact that it's the Hey Hayidin in front of it. But either way, the Gemara says Halav Hachi Havamina Cholav de Behema Tmeya Shari. So it's sort of a surprising Gemara that says, and the Gemara is actually, this is really a question. The Gemara is saying, well, wait a second, if it weren't for this Gezeres HaKasev, I would think that milk from a non-kosher animal is kosher. So and the Gemara asks right after, it says, Maishna Mahadetanya, Hatmeim, when it's talking about the shiratzim, the insects that are tamei, they're not, that we can't eat. It says that they are the hatmeim, again with the hay, and that the Brisa says from that word we learn la'asar tziran ve'rotva ve'kipa shohen, that not only are the insects themselves not kosher, but if you were to cook them and the gravy of them or what's left behind, the dregs of whatever you cooked of them is not kosher. So nothing that even comes out of a non-kosher insect would be kosher. So why would I think that an animal like a camel or a horse, that if you got milk out of it, those are non-kosher animals? Why would I think that the milk coming out of the animal would be kosher if the animal itself isn't kosher? It should be the same idea. And the Gemara answers again a little bit further down and says, "Itzrich sakata dachamina." You might have thought, "Ho veleka midi daase mechai v'sharia rachmana v'hai cholav ki ever minachai." You might have thought that, wait a second here, why should I even be able to drink even milk from a kosher animal? We know that anything that comes out of a live animal is not available, is not fit for consumption. You're not allowed to eat it. Ever minachai. Right? You can't just rip off a piece of an animal and eat it, or cook it and eat it. That's ever minachai. So why would we think that cholav, that milk from a live animal, would be kosher? But we say hu b'shari, but it is in fact kosher. We are able to drink, right? We know this. We're able to drink milk and dairy. So the Gemara says v'hokach afilu b'behema tmeya lishtari. So the Havamina was that, once you're going to tell me that something that I would have thought is usher anyway, milk from even a kosher animal is going to be okay, it's not Evrim Minachai, then I might actually think that milk from a non-kosher animal is also going to be mutter, meaning it's a completely separate halacha altogether outside of the animal itself. And therefore I would have a Havamina to say, yeah, it might be kosher as well. Mashmalan, that no. We have this Gezeres HaKasev from Gamal or from Hagamal that tells us that no, that is that milk from a non-kosher animal is also, you can't drink it. Now,
Jeff, eggs are also ever in high, right? Eggs. Are we gonna cover eggs?
Oh, eggs. No, we're not. That's a good question. So we won't. Maybe we'll cover that separately. That would be an interesting. Right? There's a lot of halachas about eggs, and yeah. But no, this in here we're not. I mean, it doesn't mention them explicitly. So yeah. But now that so now we have to ask ourselves, well, wait a second here. So why is it? So if according to this last piece of the Gemara, it sounds like really we would think that even milk from a kosher animal wouldn't be kosher, because it seems to fall into the same category as Ever Minachai. So how do we know that we can, what's our source? How do we know that we can drink even kosher milk or milk from a kosher animal? So just to wrap that piece up, so the Gemara literally says v'yibais ema mehocha. So it's an answer that's not refuted. There's a few other answers that were refuted, but he says that the Gemara says, here's an answer from here: Eretz zvas chalav udvash. Right. So how de shari mishtabech lan kari mi b'midi de lo chazi. So how can we, give praise to the land that is flowing in milk and honey if we can't drink the milk? So it must be that we can drink the milk, right? So that's one way of understanding that is that the chalav is from a kosher animal is in fact okay, but from a non-kosher animal that would not be okay. So that's how we learn it out, which is just, on its own, it's sort of interesting just to understand how we know that milk from a kosher animal is okay to drink, milk from a non-kosher animal is not okay to drink. And there is a sifra as well on Parsha Shmini. In the bottom part of this, it says, Minayin l'rabas chalav behema tmeya. So how would we know that we can't drink again? It's a similar question of how do we know we can't drink the milk from a non-kosher animal. Asar behema tmeya, asar anavim ben nazir, manavim ben nazir nasa masha yotze me'en k'mosam, af behema tmeya nasa es shetz me'en k'mosam. So this medrash is a little bit different, but it says, how do we know that you can't? So he says that it's the same lumdus as from a nazir. We know that a nazir is not allowed to drink, is not allowed to consume grapes and anything else that comes out of grapes. So you can't eat raisins, you can't drink grape juice, you can't drink wine. But all of it is because of the problem of grapes, wine from a nazir. But anything else that comes out of it, out of those same grapes, the nazir is usher to eat, to consume. So therefore, too, the afba behemet meya, that the non-kosher animal, you got the same problem. Anything that comes out of that non-kosher animal is also going to be not usher to eat or drink.
How do we know that about the Nazir?
Oh, that even like the grapes or the raisins, that I believe is actually a gzeirus akasav. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it's actually from the psukim around Nazir that tell us that.
Yayin v'shech or something like that?
It's right. So it says yayin specifically, but then it also talks about, I believe it even specifically mentions like the dregs or grape products. And so from there we learn that any kind of grape product. Yeah. So we're gonna let's transition a little bit now. So there's another Gemara that's sort of connected to this idea. The Gemara is in Avodah Zarah. It's actually a Mishnah and then a Gemara. So the Mishnah says in Avodah Zarah, ve'elu dvarim shel ovdei kochavim asurim ve'ein isrim isur hana. So there's certain things that come from a non-Jew, meaning it really, this is specifically talking about somebody who's an oved avodas kochavim. That might be usher, but you could still get hana from it, meaning that maybe that product you could sell it and make money from it, or you could feed it to your animal. You can get hana in other ways other than eating it. So it says chalav shechobo over kochavim ve'en yisro roahu. So we're talking about a non-Jewish farmer milks a cow, and the Jew didn't watch the whole process. So from that, sounds like you can't drink it, but you could get hana from it. And we pas shem and other things as well, but that's what we're interested in. And the Gemara says, Tanina, lahadatan rabbanan yoshev yisrael betzad eder shel over kochavim ve'over kochavim choliv lo umevi lo ve'eno choshesh. Okay, so the Gemara says that we learned that if let's say there's a Jewish person who's sitting on next to a non-Jewish farm, next to his flock, and this non-Jewish farmer is milking his flock, milking his cows, and he brings the Jew milk, and it seems like it's okay, but we're not concerned about this, that maybe the milk, it sounds like that the milk would have come from a non-kosher animal, right? There's no chash of that. Hey chidami. So how is this? Why is this okay? So ida leka davar tame beedro. So if you're going to tell me, well, his flock only had, let's say, sheep and cows, no non-kosher animals were in his flock, then pshita, then obviously, I mean, there's not even a question that would be okay. You could drink that milk. Now that's interesting in itself. But what if he did have a non-kosher animal or more than one non-kosher animal in his flock? Why would that be okay for this for the Jew to drink? Why is that seems to be the situation here the Gemara is bringing. So la'olam ika davar tameh. So it really is that there is a non-kosher animal or more than one non-kosher animal in the flock. And if the Jew who's sitting there next to the farm were to stand up and see and take a look, he would be able to see whether he's milking from a cow or a camel or a horse or whatever else. But if he's sitting down, lo chazile, then he can't see. So it's only if he stands up you can see. So so you might have thought, you might have thought that since he's sitting down, he can't see, we should be concerned that the non-Jew is mixing in milk from a non-kosher animal. Mashmalan, no, the Gemara comes to teach us, that since if the Jew were to stand up and see it, irtuse mirtas, the non-Jew is afraid, velo mi'arev be. He's afraid, and therefore he wouldn't mix the two together, and we can trust that he's giving us, or he's giving this Jew, only milk from a cow or from sheep, I guess. So so that's an interesting Gemara about where we start to understand, okay, what about really sort of more applications of this. And the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah brings this down to halacha. It says chalav shecholbo oved kochavim, so milk that a non-Jew milks, v'nisor roahu aser shema irev bo chalav tamei. So here it's very clear as to what we're concerned about. We're concerned that there might be a tarovis, right? That there might be a mixture of kosher and non-kosher milk together. That would be a problem. So here it's very clear and this is really just from the Gemara. Motor sheyare shema ya'amod v'yarahu v'hu sheyodesha chalav tamei asur Yisrael. So as long as this non-Jew understands that the Jew cannot drink milk from a non-kosher animal, he's going to be afraid to mix the two together. Maybe he'll lose his customer or whatever it is that he's afraid of, but he knows that it's not going to work out well, so therefore he won't do it. We can trust that in that situation. So we can see that obviously a tarovis of non-kosher milk and kosher milk is going to be a problem because drinking non-kosher milk was an Isra Daraisa. So the mixture would be a problem. So now the question is, the milk that's coming from the non-Jewish farmers, right? So this obviously has applications to our world of where most of us are drinking. Most Jews today are probably drinking what's called chalav stam, right? Meaning that it is chalav that is not being, we don't have a mashgiach present to make sure that no non-kosher milk is going into it, right? We sort of rely on the fact that there's only cow's milk that's going into the milk that we drink, right? As opposed to chalav Yisrael, where it's actually being monitored. We could go into this. I mean, there's a lot of this, the differences between chalav Yisrael and chalav stam. But I thought that there was one last piece here, and I know probably more time as well. But to try and understand, like, what is the difference, or what is the requirement for chalav Yisrael today? And I thought that's an interesting question, like to try and really understand. Is the issue that we're worried that non-kosher milk is going to go into our milk supply? Is that really the question? And we're going to see this from the Ravaz, is that I'll just sort of set it up as that's the question. Is that what we're concerned about? Or is there something else? So the Radvaz in his Chuvas has a question that comes to him. He says, Sheila, O Sheilas Chalav Shechabo Akum Vein Yisro Rawahu, right? So that situation where the non-Jewish farmer is milking the cows and there's no Jews that are present to watch the process, Vein Shem Davar Tame Sheyadua Zeb Birur. And there's no, and the situation is there's no non-kosher animals present. Right? That we know clearly, he says. Maybe in this place, in this location, there's no lo gamal, lo chamor, nekeva, or kagon shahaya ha'eder beso ha'ir. Maybe we just know in this location, maybe we're talking about Europe where there's no camels, there's no donkeys or female donkeys, right? It doesn't exist in this flock. Or maybe in this city, in this location, those animals just don't exist. Right? That much we know. We know the Jew has done his homework. We know that there are no non-kosher animals around. So that milk comes out of that place. We know there's no non-kosher animals. So at the same time, we also know that there's no hashgacha. There's no Jew that was actually watching the process of the milking. Okay. So hasheila im gzeres acholav shechabo akum havya kegzeres dvinas anachrim da pasco shafilu b'makam shema'amidim also bisraf afilu hachi asur mishum kevin begazru gazru v'chin b'cholav odium malo. So he's asking, without getting into the questions about the cheese, but he says the question is the gezerah simply that we're worried that non-kosher milk is going to get mixed into kosher milk, and now we have something that we simply cannot drink, or is a problem that there's a gezerah, and once the chachamim make a gezerah, the gezerah is the gezerah. You can't. There's no room to sort of maneuver because there's a gezerah in place. And therefore, we always have to drink milk where we know that there is some form of hashgacha in place. That's what the question that came to the Ravaz is. So he answers tshuva. Adavar borer ki agvina ne'asara beminyan mehanach ta'amei da'amrim b'gemara avalo kein b'chalav. He says the cheese that there's a gezerah and the gezerah is a gezerah. That's true by the cheese. He says avalo b'chalav. He says really the whole thing about the milk is that there was always a concern that there was going to be non-kosher milk mixed in. So you should know that if you were sitting on the side of the flock, where he's able to see, even though that's in the flock there is a non-kosher animal, mutter, because he's watching it. V'im gezerah klalis haisa lo have matirin ki agavda v'chein nira medivri kol poskim. And he says that if that was the case, that we have this concern, even though he's sitting there, once you have this mixture of different animals in there, that the gezerah would have been implied. This is what the Ravaz is saying. And he says, according to the other poskim, this is the case as well. That this is what they're saying, that really this is just a gezerah of we're concerned that non-kosher milk is coming in. But Mordechai Allah dahab deparchin b'gemara idaleka davar tame v'chula yish mochechin mikan she'im boror lanu de'en be'emet timea be'edra demotra lika chalav mina akum afa pisha ein yisrael ra'ah v'ta'us hu biyadam yimkin avalimar. The leka davar tame be'edro lameli yisrael omed betzad edro pshita omed betzad edro sagi. So the Mordechai, without I couldn't get the actual Mordechai. He's quoting it here, but it's unfortunately it's not available in this in Sfaria. The Mordechai has questions with the Gemara itself that we just saw, and he says it's so simple that can't be what the Gemara is saying. And the Mordechai is actually saying that no, really you really do need to have hashgacha. But the Ravaz is saying Ladidi miha lo ire clown de lo matzilak shui hachi de beinin omed betzad ermishim gilui omishim chash davar tame lo chayshin kevan she'ein beedro davar tame v'chein avanti mitoch divrei Tosfos. Okay, without we don't have to go too much further, but it's interesting that the Ravaz is asking this question, and the Ravaz is saying really the whole chash was just on having non-kosher milk coming into kosher milk. And just to take a look at the Minchas Asher, so this is Rav Asher Weiss. And he says, "V'yesod asofek b'hagdaras Israel." What's really at the the underpinning of this problem of drinking milk that's what we call chalav stam, chalav akum, milk that's coming from a non-kosher farm. Right? Is the problem a safek deraisa that we're going to have non-kosher milk? But or maybe this is really just about sfekas, and then you wouldn't have to. There'd be no room to aser regular milk, not meaning non-chalav yishol milk, because we know that the majority of milk is tahor. I actually just saw something. I probably should have brought this in, but there's from the CRC. There was an interesting article from the CRC a few years back where one of the mashgichim there was saying that in this country, in the USA, there are in certain very few places do they milk pigs, horses, or camels. And he was talking about just the cost of milk per gallon of these animals is much higher. They're very difficult to milk. They don't produce a lot of milk. It's very interesting. So really the chash in America seems to be this what Rav Asher Weiss is saying, that just if the din is in sfekas, then we should be able to go after rove, because no one would be purposely, I mean, accidentally, it's hard to say, right? But purposely, no one's going to mix non-kosher milk with kosher milk. So if that's really the din, then there shouldn't be any problem. But maybe there's just a gzera, right? And there's no savik, there's no concern. Ve'ein chashash latar rovis chalav tamei ala tam she'asur chachamim avav mitzad din esfegos ein iser, right? Ve'im achen gezeres chachamim yishkan v'lo chashash bavad halo klal gado biyadinu shegezeres chachamim omedes be'eno gam kasher tam hagzera kvar ein bo mamish. Now this is a very interesting point that Rav Asher Weiss is saying. He's saying if the other problem, though, it could be that the problem is not that we're concerned about a chash of a sfeika deraisa, that we may not be worried about, but there could be a different problem, which is that once there is a gzera in our hand, he says, "Al klal gado." I'll just read it again. Halal klal gado biadenu shegzeres chachamim omdos be'eno. Once you have a gzera of the chachamim that is standing and it is, it's still in place. Even once the reason for the gezerah, this is the reason that we understand, if the gezerah is gone, it still would stand. And so that's going to be the other tzad. Why do people today say, I can only drink chalav yisrael? Because that's the other tzad to say, is that no, once the gezerah is in place, it doesn't matter what the realities are today. The gezerah is the gezerah. And it's interesting, I didn't bring it in. The Aruch HaShulchan says that specifically. He says, I know there are places, he lived, 150, 200 years ago, and he's saying, I know, where we are, there's no non-kosher milk around. Don't give me that. He says, don't give me that. The gezerah is a gezerah. And so that's the other side of this argument, is once the gezerah is in place, there's a gezerah. Now, we know that, there's Moshe, there's also the Chazon Ish who talked about this idea of the government becoming, and they have different ways of looking at it. But, again, it seems to be from the point of view of concern about non-kosher milk coming in. So we know that we've got the USDA, we've got other things, but this is the other side. If we want to try to understand why those who hold chalav yisrael hold chalav yisrael, it's because they would say, well, there's a gezerah. Once there's a gezerah, there's nothing to be done about it. We have to hold by it. And last point on this is obviously this is an issue really in only here in Chutz La'aretz, in Israel, where you have where all the big dairies in Israel. I don't know. I mean, I imagine you could, if you really wanted to find milk coming from non-kosher from an Arab farmer, I'm sure you could. But certainly the big dairies in Israel are all Jewish farmers, are all Jewish owned. So chalav Yisrael is really not even an issue in Israel. This is really just an issue once you go outside of Israel.
So Jeff, in 500 years ago, the gezerah would prohibit a Jew from drinking milk from a farmer, a non-Jewish farmer who has only cows, the Gezerah would still prohibit that if there's nobody there watching.
Right. That's exactly it.
Is somebody watching?
If that's right. So for those poskim who are saying the Gezerah is the Gezerah, then yeah, that's what it sounds like. Is once the Gezerah is in place, it doesn't matter that the reality is, are not that way. If you're going to hold for those poskim who say no, it's really just a question of sfekas, right? It's a question of Savi Deraisa. If we can manage the Savi Deraisa by removing any real tangible concern of non-kosher milk going in, then we can drink that milk. So that, yeah, exactly. That's really the two sides of this thing. That's what it seems to come down to. Once you already say one way or the other, then there's a lot of other shilas. Like once you say, like let's say you're holding by Chalav Yisrael. What's really complicated today is that you have a lot of dairy farms who will supply a dairy with milk. So one large dairy could get their supply of milk from, let's say, a dozen farms. So where does the hashgacha, how do you make sure you've got hashgacha? Can you use cameras, closed circuit TV, that sort of thing? There's a lot of these types of, problems once you're just figuring out, well, how do we manage Chalav Yisrael? For that side of it, for those who drink Chalav Stam, then it's really, are you relying on the USDA as Rav Moshe says, and if so, how does that work as well? Is it because that there's fines and there's penalties if they were not careful enough about, because again, there are certain farms that do milk non-kosher animals. It's possible that these two could get mixed together. But there are a lot of these penalties and fines and stuff like that from the USDA if you were to do something like that. So, yeah,
Would the Gezerah also mean that a mashgiach wouldn't help? It has to be a Jewish farmer, and it has to be a mashgiach that's Jewish. Everybody.
No, you could have a non-Jewish farmer. And that's the mission that we saw up above. Where as long as you can have a non-Jewish farm, and so I think that's where most of the Chalav Yisrael today comes from. There are those are non-Jewish farms, but they have a mashgiach who's present, at least in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's through the use of that's a whole discussion. But even if it's by use of cameras and other things to try and make it more feasible, more logistically feasible. But yeah, non-kosher farms that have mashgiach is okay too.
Okay.